Hey everyone, welcome back to Toasty TCG. In today's video, I'm talking about my casual Bluefarm Kraum Tymna deck. For those of you that are unfamiliar with like CEDH and what Bluefarm is, it's basically a CEDH deck, of course, that plays Tymna and Kraum with the goal of drawing through your deck using their abilities and a couple other value engines in their colors to draw into like interactions, stop your opponent, and eventually just like infinite combos to win out the game. So I really like the idea of these commanders. Tymna draws you cards for attacking your opponents, and Kraum draws you cards when they try to play the game. Both these commanders were really cool, and as a non-CEDH player, I wanted to find a way to incorporate their abilities into a casual game without still being like, like CEDH and overpowering the table. So what I came up with is a Tymna Kraum list that plays no infinites, but still incorporates the idea of playing like a lot of interaction and value engines to draw into things. So without further ado, like the first couple piles of cards are basically like things that I took from the CEDH idea of Tymna Kraum and incorporated. And then I made my own idea of how am I going to make this deck still able to win that we'll talk about in a little bit. So to start off with the value engine stuff, we have our 1-drops, Esper Sentinel, Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor, and Mystic Remora. These two, of course, draw you cards for your opponent playing the game, and these two can draw you into either your value engines or your answers. And then for our 2-drops, we've got Call of the Ring, Archivist of Ogma, Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff, and Orcish Bowmasters. So 3 of these cards are part of like the CEDH lists, while Call of the Ring is my own personal tech. The reason I like Call of the Ring in this deck is the way that this deck actually wins out is through just combat damage, which is how we're going to like course trigger Tymna, and just playing good attackers. So Call of the Ring's first ability is to give whatever creatures your ring bearer Skulk. So this is a perfect fit in the deck, because giving the creature Skulk means you're going to be able to attack more, getting your Tymna triggers, and also draws you cards. And then for our 3-drops, we've got Rhystic Study and Kembal, Profiteering Mayor. This is a roughly new card that just makes copies of your opponent's tokens and drains your opponents when you get to make those tokens. And our 4-drops are Smothering Tithe and Trouble in Pairs, just very good draw cards. The more of these value engine cards you put into play, the stronger, of course, this deck gets, as you're just going to draw a ton of cards, a ton of answers, a ton of your combat creatures. So, of course, the more of these cards that you put on the battlefield, the better the deck's going to be. For our interactions, for our 1-drops, got Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. Pretty basic. Our 2-drops, we got Dovin's Veto, Psych Rift, Mana Drain, and Shouldered's Edict. For our 3-drops, we have Anguish Unmaking, Generous Gift, Fierce Guardianship, Flatline, and Reverse the Polarity. And then our 4-drops, we've got Vats and Deadly Relic. So some of these cards here I really like for they actually interact with each other. That being Vats, Flatline, and Reverse the Polarity. Namely because Flatline makes your opponent's creatures become O1s, and Vats lets you target any number of creatures with equal toughness and destroy them at split second. And then Reverse the Polarity can swap the power and toughness of your opponent's creatures. So if you pair Flatline with either of these, you can make a one-sided board wipe, which I think is really cool. And then our 6-drop is Farewell. Next up is just like our ramp pile. Nothing too special. Got a Jeweled Lotus for a 0-drop. 1-drops, we've got a Soul Ring, of course, Wayfarer's Bauble, and a Curse of Opulence. This is another cool tech in the deck because there's going to be like a lot of attacking with this deck, so you're going to make a lot of treasures. And then 2-drops are just Thought Vessel, Felwar Stone, Signet, and Mind Stone. Now, onto like the real cool part of the deck finally is, first off, I separated the smaller creatures that we're going to attack with and the bigger creatures into 2 separate categories. So to start off with our smaller creatures, these are typically creatures that you want to play around the same time that you're going to cast Tymna. That way you can get some early draws in with her. Our 1-drops being Ragavan and Sarah's Ascendant. Just 2 creatures that are pretty good. Just, if you see them super early and bring them down and then get your Tymna out, you're probably drawing a good amount of cards off them. Our 2-drops are Psychic Frog, Phantasmal Image, Ledger Shredder, Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger, Baleful Strix, and Line Sash. So Psychic Frog is another newer card that if it hits people, you have to draw a card. You can discard cards, put 1/1 counters on it. You can exile 3 cards from your grave to give it flying. There's also Kroxa, which exiles cards from graves. So the reason I really like these 2 cards specifically is this deck doesn't play a whole lot out of its grave. So having things that just say, oh, well, all these cards that are gone now, you're not going to really be using, you can turn into extra value. These other guys, Ledger Shredder, of course, is another value engine that can draw you cards. He's also an evasive flyer like Baleful Strix. Phantasmal Image can be the best attacker on the battlefield. And then Line Sash can either make itself big and eat cards out of your opponent's grave, or it can make an equipped creature big and eat cards out of your opponent's grave. And then for our 3-drops, we've got Satoru Umezawa, Kellogg, Dangerous Mind, and Dimir Cutpurse. So when Cutpurse deals combat to a player, you make that player discard a card and draw a card. So that means Tymna's going to draw you 2 cards. Whenever Kellogg just attacks, not even deals damage, and he has First Strike and Haste, you get a Treasure Token. And then Satoru gives your entire hand ninjutsu for 2 in Dimir. And then whenever you ninjutsu, you get to look at top 3 of your library, add 1 to your hand, and bomb the rest of them. So this lets you cheat out your bigger creatures for a little less mana. And then our 4-drops, we've got the RMS Titanic, Elturel Survivors, Rose Cutthroat Raider, and Caesar Legion's Emperor. RMS Titanic, I really love. If it hits someone, you're going to make tokens equal to the damage, which hits 7/1, and then gets sacrificed. Elturel Survivors has Myriad, so you can get, if this thing can hit all 3 of your opponents, you'll trigger Tymna for each of them. Rose, the Cutthroat Raider, end of combat. If you attack this turn, not even just with Rose, but it is a 3/2 with First Strike, you get a Junk Token, which is a free sacrifice the artifact. You get to exile top of your library at sorcery speed, and you can play that card this turn. And then whenever you sacrifice a Junk Token, you get red mana, so that's a plus. And then Kaisar can turn your creatures into sack fodder for 2 of 3 different abilities, which is card draw, tokens, or dealing damage. So those are all the creatures that I can consider on the smaller side. Onto our 5-drops, we've got Sunscorch Regent and Goldspan Dragon. Just 2 very good cards. This one is another one of those cards where you're going to get benefits from your opponents playing the game by gaining life and making Sunscorch bigger. And then Goldspan Dragon just attacks and makes treasures, gets targeted, gets treasures, and all your treasures sack for double the mana. Inferno Titan, Grave Titan, Aurelia the War Leader, and Tivit make up our 6-drops. All these are fantastic attackers, 3 of which when they enter the battlefield get you benefits, and Aurelia gives you a second combat. And then our final big creature is a Balefire Dragon as our 7-drop. When it hits, it just deals that much damage to each creature that a player controls. This thing is especially cool when I paired it with Reverse the Polarity, because one of my opponents I played against one time, they had a ton of like little flyers, so I just reversed the polarity so they couldn't block, swung 6 into them, and then cleared the whole board. Balefire Dragon is definitely a very cool card that no one really expects. And then finally these are just cards that we're playing because they're just overall good. Some of them are combat tricks, some of them are just like other little things that don't really like fall into any specific category. Got Teamer Battle Rage, Popular Entertainer, and Blind Obedience as our 2-drops. This gives a creature double strike, trample of its power 4 greater at instant speed. Popular Entertainer is extremely good in this deck because we have 2 commanders, so they both gain the ability that whenever one or more creatures you control deal damage to a player, you go to creature that they control. So if you have both your commanders out and you hit someone, they'll both trigger, goading 2 of your opponent's creatures. And then Blind Obedience makes your opponent's creatures and artifacts enter tapped, meaning it'll just be easier to get in for damage while also slowing your opponents down. Onto our 3-drops are Ghostly Prison, Propaganda, and Nefarious Protection. These are more just like Pello 40 cards to protect ourselves. And finally, this is one of the big win cons of the deck, is Necroma's Will. As long as you have your commander, you can choose both. Otherwise, you can either give all your creatures Flying, Vigilance, and Double Strike, or you can give them Lifelink, Indestructible, and Protection from all colors. This is typically how the deck plans to win out, is by playing a long grind game of whittling opponents down, and then you get to go swing everything in, and Necroma's Will can typically close the game out. But yeah, that's basically how I like to play this deck, is just instead of digging for infinites, we're digging for creatures we can attack with, some combat tricks, and win the game that way. For our land base, got Vault of Champions, Luxury Suite, Haunted Ridge, Storm-Carved Coast, Training Center, Polluted Delta, Shipwreck Marsh, Morphic Pool, Watery Grave, Sundown Pass, Fury Calm Snarl, Glacial Fortress, Hollowed Fountain, Sea of Clouds, Deserted Beach, Flooded Strand, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard. Our 1 colorless land is an Urza Saga, and then we've got 4 of each basic: Plains, Mountain, Swamp, Island. But that about wraps up this list. If this is something that you thought was interesting or cool, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We are super close to 200 subscribers, so everyone is just super appreciated if you subscribe. Let me know what you think about casual Bluefarm, and until next time, guys, I'll see you around.